and we're just getting SQL Server set up. We're going to play around with it a little bit, and then we're going to look at getting our database set up for our Control-Alt-Delete computer store. And there's a few different ways we can go about this. I'll show you a few different ways. I'm going to show first how we can get it set up to run locally. That's going to be the fastest. I've also set up a version, or will set up a version on a shared server, and I'll share that credential. So if you're for some reason unable to run the database locally, you'll be able to connect to my database online. So one thing we want to check for once our SQL Server is installed is if you just do a search for the word manage, we should find this application called SQL Server Management Studio. I have version 2017, I think version 2018 is now. It doesn't matter what version you have, as long as you have this, it should get installed. Are you shaking your head? You don't have it?
There were a lot of options to pick from when you installed it.
Okay, if you do not see this program installed, it's available as a separate standalone install. So all you need to do is quickly do a search for SQL Server Management Studio. So if you search for this, the very first link is going to take you is to the download page for it. So it's known by the acronym SSMS. So SSMS is kind of like Microsoft's equivalent of MySQL Workbench, but on steroids. Far more features, far more powerful. So the current version is 18. So you can go ahead and grab this and install it if it did not get included when you installed the main SQL Server program. Blair? Yep. Okay, so that's the same thing, yeah. So the other thing you could do is rerun the install and then go to into the installation. Was it under installation options or components? So under installation components in the installer we ran, SQL Server Management Tools is an option. So you could also install it from there. Or you can add it as a standalone, doesn't matter. So this is the primary interface we're going to use for connecting to and managing our databases. Okay, good. So that takes you here. So you can download the latest version. I'm going to open it up. I would recommend you put it into your start menu because we're going to need it most weeks in class. So I'm going to open it up and we'll look at a couple of the options here. So again, there's really three different options we have for connecting to a database. We can either connect to our local server with a username and password. We can connect to our local server with Windows authentication, or we can connect to a remote server. I will show you all three of those options. Okay? So for most people, you're going to connect like this. For most people, to connect locally, all you have to do is this. The server name, you just put the word local in round brackets. And if you accepted the default when you set the program up, the default authentication method is Windows, meaning you don't have to provide a separate username and password to connect to your local server. As long as you're logged into Windows, you can connect, your Windows account can connect. So mine isn't set up like this. So if I click connect, I'm probably going to get an error. Yeah, it doesn't like this for me. Because when I set mine up, I changed the authentication from Windows. I changed it to SQL Server authentication. So I need to connect with this option where the user account, I'm not going to use mine. I created a different user account for our class. If you pick the SQL Server option where you're going to provide a password, it's not related to your Windows account, make sure you check the remember password, and then the next time you come back, it doesn't ask you for the password again. It'll just store it. The other thing is, rather than using my local server name. The way I set mine up is I have to use this is my computer name. It's the equivalent to local. So yours may look a little different than mine. Just make sure if you're using SQL Server authentication, you check off remember the password. So I'll click connect. And when I do that, it should open this window down here called the Object Explorer. This shows any servers that I'm connected to. So right now I'm connected to my own server on my laptop. So in here, I have this node for databases. I have a whole bunch of databases on my server. If you just installed, yours is going to be empty. So we're actually going to create two quick databases. We're just going to create a simple one and build a couple of tables just to see how it works. And then we'll create a separate one. I've already put a script up to build our store that we're building out with ASP.NET. So creating a database is really simple. One of the nice things about Management Studio is that we can do a lot of things without actually having to write SQL commands in the way that we did when we used MySQL. So if I want to create a new database, I'll just create a test one here. If I just right-click the databases, I can choose New Database, and I'll just call this one, I'll call it Tuesday. This is just kind of a test. I don't need to keep this one. So this would be the same as running a create database Tuesday command in SQL. So I'll just click it and it will create an empty database. It shows up in my window down here. And now I want to add a couple of tables to it. So I have the option to write create table commands, but SQL Server Management Studio gives us an easier way to do this. If I just right click on tables, I can just make a new table. And it allows me to build a table through this really simple visual interface. So I'm showing you this because you're going to have to do this for your assignment, right? You're planning whatever tables you need to do assignment 1. So you can create those tables with traditional SQL commands, or you can do it the easy way, which is use the visual editor. So I'll just make up a couple of tables. Maybe I'll call this, we'll have a country and a cities table. So I'll create a column called country ID. It'll ask me for a data type, which will be an integer. I'll uncheck the little nulls button. So I want to use this field as a primary key. So there's two things I want to do. I want to make this value primary key. I also want to make the values automatically assigned by the database. All our primary key values, the user should never have to enter them. The database should always assign them. So to do that, down here in this column properties, I have this option called identity specification, and it defaults to no. If I click on this and expand it, it gives me a sub-property here that says is identity. And if I change no to yes, this is the equivalent in MySQL of adding the auto increment identifier. Let the database automatically assign the values. And to make this my primary key, all I have to do is right-click it and choose Set Primary Key. So I don't have to type any of these commands out in SQL, worry about syntax errors, etc. And maybe now I'll just add another column, which is a name column, which will maybe be 50 characters, also not null. So it's really important when we set our IDs, remember we want to make them primary keys. We always want to turn the identity from no to yes. One of the other neat things we can do is if we don't want our IDs to start at 1, let's say I want my country IDs to start at 1,000. If I change this identity seed property from 1 to 1,000, the first time we put a country in, it will actually be ID number 1,000 rather than number 1. And this is often a good idea when we're building a database, especially if we're building something like a store. Who wants order number 1? Not me. I want order number 10,000. Gives me more confidence that company is going to send me whatever it is I ordered. So at my table here, it says table 1, and we can see a star here, meaning it's got unsaved changes. If I just click save on my toolbar, it'll now prompt me for a name. So I'll just call this country, give it a descriptive name. And usually my table name should match my primary key, and my primary key's got the word ID on the end. So there's my table. Maybe we'll just we'll write a query and let's insert a few countries in here. So for this, we'll click on new query. And we'll notice we're connected. This shows me all the databases on my server. We want to run this query on the Tuesday database. I don't want to run it on a different database. So we'll just insert So let's insert a few values. Let's insert countries that people in the room were born in. All right, we can start with Canada. I'll just maybe copy this. What other countries should we add to our class list? We're looking, where do people in the room come from? India, okay. Any other countries represented? Any others? Any others we should add? Any others? So before I run my script, I can actually validate it. If I hit this checkbox, it'll check my syntax and let me know if there's any errors. So if I do something like this, it'll tell me I've got a syntax error here. So now to run my script, I can just click the execute button. Right? It'll run my 5 insert commands. Our messages tell us that our command ran successfully. That's good. And we said we use the seed of 100 as an ID, so our IDs should be 100 to 105. So to check this now, if I see what's in here, I don't want to run my insert lines again, so I'm just going to highlight this one line and click my execute button. Because this line is highlighted and the insert commands are not, going to run again. So we just want to have a look in our table. So now we've got 5 countries, right? And our IDs started with 1,000, so we know anytime we add a new country, it will automatically get the next available ID number. So you need to create a couple of tables for your assignment. You don't need any more than 2, but I would suggest this is probably the easiest way to set them up. If you prefer, if you are really comfortable with SQL and you want to create table commands and set them up that way, no problem, you can do that. If I will show you a couple of other useful features of SQL Server that I really like, that make our lives easier as developers. So here's a database I created in this class. Actually, it was last year. So one of the other nice things that it has, so for example, if I want to change the structure of a table, I don't necessarily need to go and write an alter table command. I can just right-click my table and choose design, and then it takes me back into the editor. So if I want to add columns, or maybe I realize, my address field isn't long enough, I could go in here and I can just change something and click save, and it'll save my changes. I want to add, delete, modify anything in my table structure. Steven?
So what happens if you reduce the size of the data that's already bigger.
It'll give me a warning. It'll say, this may truncate your data. Do you want to do this, yes or no? One of the other really nice features is it has this option called a view. So a view, what this does is this allows us to write SQL queries without actually writing any of the code. It allows us to use a drag and drop query builder. So it says, okay, here are your tables. Let's say I want to see all of the orders. So I want to see all of my orders by product category. So I can pick, it shows the relationships because I created relationships in my tables. So show me the category name, the product name, the price, and the quantity. And now I can just, somewhere in here, I can run my query. Oh, there's no data in here, so that's why it's not running. But it will actually write the SQL, and I could add sorting, grouping, totaling, you know, sort by category name and then by product name and group by, you know, sum the total amount. So I want to get the total number of the total revenue by product. So it will actually write my SQL for me. There's a whole bunch of other advanced features in here, most of which we won't get into. There'll be a couple of other things we may look at later on. One of the other nice tools that it has, if I go to tasks, is it has the ability to import and export data. So many times our customers may have a whole bunch of data in Excel files, like in the video, and we want to be able to bring those files and get those imported into a database. So if we import, we could browse to an Excel file or a text file or a CSV, and we could import data. We can even connect to another database so that we can move data between our database and another one. Let's say we create our site working locally, and now we're ready to test it on a server, so we want to export the data to the server. So we can actually connect to a live server instead. We can use these import and export tools. We've got backup tools, a lot of other things in here. So if I want to take an immediate backup, I can just back up and it'll create a backup file here. Or if I want to restore from a backup because I broke something in my database, I could just browse to yesterday's backup and overwrite my database. So I don't really need this database, but what we want to do is we want to create our Control-Alt-Delete database. So I'm going to create another one. So I'll go back up to the very top where it has my server name and databases, and I'm going to choose New Database. I will call this one Control-Alt-PC. That's the name of the application we're building. Please don't put any spaces in your database names. And I'll just click OK. So this creates another new empty database. I'll show you where these get created. The actual database files live here under your program files, SQL Server. So under here are all my local databases. So notice 2 files for each name. There's an MDF, that's the Microsoft data file. That's the database file itself. And this LDF is a log file. So it keeps a record of transactions and errors. So it generates 2 files. So here's my Tuesday MDF and my log LDF. Some of these get to be quite big. Here's one that's 140 megabytes. So now when I open up my Control-Alt-PC, there are no tables here. It's just a new empty database. Navneet, you have a question? What does the error say? When you try to create a new one? Okay, I may have to come and have a look at that. So we're creating a new database. And so what I've done is just given, this isn't exactly what our database is going to look like, but it's fairly close. These are the tables that we're going to need and the relationships between them. So in our computer store, we're going to want to create categories of products. Every category will have an ID and a name. The products themselves will have a name, description, photo, and price. And every product will belong to a category. When users shop, they'll be able to add products to their cart. So every cart will have a product ID, the quantity, and a date. I think I've modified this a little. And when a user checks out, we're going to create orders in an order table, and we're going to have a one-to-many relationship between orders and order details. So if on one order, a customer orders 4 different products, they'll have one order and 4 separate order details, each one for the individual product they've bought. So there'll also be a relationship between products and order details, that one product can be on many order details. Right? We could all buy the same product, but every order detail is for one and only one product. So our database structure is roughly this, with a few minor adjustments. The users table we will need, but I didn't include. We're not going to build that table ourselves. We're going to let ASP.NET auto-generate that. And that'll be done, if you remember, when we set our project up, we changed the authentication from none to individual user accounts. So that's going to use some of Microsoft's security libraries, and those libraries will automatically build out a more advanced user table, as well as like roles and permissions and some other tables. That stuff gets automatically built for us next week or the week after. So this is not included. So rather than go through and manually populate all these tables, I've just created, it's in the lesson 4, there's an SQL file here that has all the commands that will build the tables. So what we're going to do is let's just download this file, and then we can open it up in Management Studio and execute it. Just run the script and it'll build the tables. So just go ahead, you can right click and you can save the store.sql file somewhere to your machine. I've already downloaded it, so I'm not going to download it again. So once we've downloaded that file, we're going to open it up in Management Studio. So I'm going to click File and Open, and then just browse to wherever you downloaded the file. And it will open up the script in a new query window. Now notice, I don't want to run the script yet. Why don't I want to run the script right now? Right, because notice here in the dropdown, my query editor window is still connected to the Tuesday database I just made. I don't want to run the script in my Tuesday database. I want to run it in my new Control-Alt-PC database. So what would I need to do? I could write a use control, or even faster, I can just click my database drop down and make sure I change it to Control-Alt-PC. I want to run the script in this database instead. I don't need the Tuesday database anymore. Yep. Okay. I don't want to call it orders though. If I just, that's a good point. On line 27, it's giving me an error because order is an SQL keyword. So I think if I enclose that in square brackets, yeah, that goes away. I have the same issue down on line 49. Thanks for pointing that out. I changed this bit, should have tested it. So on line 27 and 49, where you get a red underline, just put square brackets around the word order. You have this little drop down here. I can come look at it in a sec, Claire, if you're still. So this is going to build 5 tables: category, product, cart, order, and order detail. So I'm going to run the script in just a second. This is about, almost all of this would be similar to what you would have seen if we were using a MySQL database. There are a few small differences. For example, we don't use auto increment. We use identity. It means the same thing. And this 1-1 means start at number 1 and increment each record by 1. So our categories are going to start with 1. Our product numbers are going to start with 1,000. And our order numbers are going to start with 2,000. And you can see the syntax for setting up the primary keys and the foreign keys is similar to MySQL, maybe slightly different. So to run this now, I'm just going to click the execute button. Again, make sure we're selecting our new Control-Alt-PC database, and I'll just execute it. It runs really fast. It's just 5 simple commands. Tells me that it worked. Now I don't see my tables over here. Notice I'm connected to the database and tables is blank. There's a little blue refresh button right above. We just click this blue refresh icon. We now have tables called cart, category, order, order detail, and product. And we can even view them visually here. So this is what the order detail table looks like. If I just expand it and expand the columns, we can see we've got 1 primary key, 2 foreign keys, and 2 other fields. Now, the chances are, I think there's 26 or 27 of us in the room. The chances that all 27 people have got everything set up, configured, and running locally is probably low. If you're having trouble connecting to your local server, I've also created a copy of this database, or I'm going to create it on a remote server that I have access to. I'll create a copy, and I'm fine if you also prefer to connect to that one. It's faster if you can connect locally, but if you can't, you should be able to connect to mine, and I'll show you how to do that. If you want to connect to mine, here's the process. And again, if you've got it running locally, you can skip this part. But if you're having trouble, I'm going to go through it. And again, this is being recorded. So up at the top here under registered servers, you should have your own server, but I want to show you how you would connect to a remote one. So under this local server group folder, if I right click it and I can choose new server registration. So I'm going to add another server in here. So in here, I have to put in the address of my remote database. So the address is SQL Server 10.loosefoot.com. I'll write these credentials on the board, actually, if you need them. You can't use Windows Authentication here, so we have to pick SQL Server Authentication. And the username is COMP2084. And the password is Georgian 2019. The capital G. So there's the credential you need. The server is and the database name is our control alt PC. So I've put COMP2084 as my username, Georgian 2019 is my password, which I want to remember. And then if I go to the second tab, the connection properties, it wants to know what database on the server am I trying to connect to, which would be Control Alt PC. So this is connecting my management studio out to a web server. The hosting company's in Saskatchewan. I think the server is in Quebec or in Colorado, are there two data centers. So if I want to see if my connection works, I can click the test button. If my credentials are correct, it says, yep, we can connect to that database server with this credential. So I'll just click OK, and I'll make sure I remember the password, and I'll maybe give it a more descriptive name. So I'll call it Control Alt PC, and it's at Loosefoot Hosting. You don't need to do this. This is just giving it a friendly name, because I may have many servers here. At least I know which one this is. And then I'll save it. So if I double click it here, it's going to connect to my remote server. So now I'm connected to two different database servers at the same time. I'm connected to my local instance, and I'm also connected to my instance on the internet. So there's a whole bunch of databases we don't have access to. I created the Control Alt PC database already, but I need to run this same script on that database because it's empty. So I'm going to create the tables. You don't need to do this. I'm going to do this part. So I'll just copy my script. And if I right click and choose new query, so it's showing me up at the top, it's the same database name, but on the Loosefoot server, being logged in as COMP2084. So copy that script and run it. Please don't run the script on my database. I'll do that part. Actually, if you try and run it, you'll get an error. Now that I've run it, it'll say those tables already exist. So now if I just refresh this database, we have the same 5 tables. So I will put the credentials up on Blackboard. If you need to connect to my database for any reason, that's fine. Please don't delete anything in there or wreck the database because multiple students may be using it. So you can use whichever one you find easier. It doesn't matter if you want to connect to my database on Loosefoot or you want to connect to your own local machine. If you can get it working on your local machine, the website will run more quickly because it's a local connection rather than a remote one. But this is an okay fallback. This should work fine as well. Use whichever one you're more comfortable with. One thing I strongly recommend is whenever you create a database, I will put this file up on Blackboard. Whenever you create a database, create a file that has the credentials. Because if you lose them, if you lose your connection to the database, you can't get back in. So for every database I have, I make a text file, I store it securely, a backup a copy in the cloud, so it's not on my machine, to store this file so that you always have access to it. So I'll upload this file to Blackboard in case you need these credentials for connecting later on. So I'll put this one in weekly learning. And I didn't use a very strong database password. I probably should have, but I was trying to keep it simple. Normally, we should be using very strong passwords. So that little text file is here if you need a copy of those credentials. Changing database credentials is something we do have to do. It does happen. Can you think of any scenarios when you would have to create, why would we ever have to change a database password? It's a couple common scenarios. Right, somebody who previously had access to it should no longer have access to it. Probably should change the database, right? Otherwise, they can still connect to it like I just did. Why else? Okay, if we forget the password and we don't put it in a secure text file where we can access it, we may have to reset it. Any other reasons? There's one other really common instance where you have to change a database password. Okay, they can be set up that way. Normally for web applications, we don't want to do that because if we forget to do it, we'll take our application down. When else do you usually have to change your passwords? If you forget it, yes. Or when something happens that's outside of your control, and the first thing you do is you go and you race to reset your password. When what happens? You get hacked. Right? So if your server gets compromised, you better change the database password, which means you have to change it in SQL Server, and then you have to change it in our application code. So the other time we may be changing not only the password is if we move servers, right? We don't want it hosted here. We have issues with that hosting company. We want to move it somewhere else. We're going to have to reset those credentials on a different host. Okay. So I would hope that everybody should be able to connect to some version of the database by now, whether it's your own or whether it's mine. Is there anybody who still cannot connect at all to either database? Excellent. Now, it is actually possible to connect through Visual Studio directly, but the interface is very limited in functionality and it runs very slowly. So typically I would recommend when you come to class every week or whenever you're working on ASP.NET, you should open Visual Studio and you should open Management Studio and connect to your database. I always have these two open when I'm working. All right, it's almost time for us to take a break, but let's open up our project. So I'll go back and open up our website that we've been working on. One other thing we will have to look at is setting up your database on Azure. Don't let me forget to show you how to do this. Because for your assignment, your database, I want your application to be deployed online, so using a local database isn't going to work. Because when I download your web application, I'm not going to have your database. So I won't actually be able to run the application. So it's going to have to all be deployed to Azure. So we will look at that hopefully today. So here was our project. We'll just get it running. I will show you how to connect through Visual Studio to our database. Said we're not really going to do it through there, but I'll show you what that interface looks like. Some of you may prefer to use it. I'm going to go to my Solution Explorer. And I'm going to open up my app settings.json. This was actually one of the quiz questions. Ryan, that was the answer you were looking for. We want to open up app settings.json because you can see if we look on line 3, what's happening here? What's this line doing? We didn't write it. Visual Studio automatically generated this. What do you suppose this is? Sorry, Navneet, can you say that again? Right. It gives us a default connection string. Now we don't want to connect to this, so this is just some local data file. We don't want to connect to this. We either want to connect to the local SQL Server database we just created or the one I created on Loosefoot. So this default connection is always here. I'm actually going to, you can delete that line or you can comment it out. Either one. So instead, I want to put in my own connection string. But I'm going to keep the name default connection. And the reason for this is this is a keyword. When we start working with Microsoft's authentication packages, those libraries expect our connection string to the database to be called default connection, written this way. So this is a keyword, so I don't want to call it something else. All our applications, the connection string will always be called default connection with no spaces. So now we want to replace this, and we can't have 2 connection strings with the same name. That's why I have to comment out or remove line 3. So now we need to connect to our local server instead. So we can write the connection string to the database, but there's an easier way to do it. Better? Justin? I think technically I could, but I can, but you know what? I probably shouldn't. It will run this way, but probably best that I remove it. Actually, you know what? Just for fun, we'll try it and see what it does. I'm curious. We'll see if the site actually still loads. Maybe it'll complain. We'll see. We will take a break in a second. So it doesn't care about the comment, it just doesn't like that empty connection string. So we could write the string ourselves, but what I'm going to do is use this little tool here, which you may or may not see, called the Server Explorer, and it will write out our connection string for us. If you don't see this Server Explorer tab here, you can turn it on through the View menu if you choose Server Explorer. And we get this little window here. So if I right-click my data connections and choose Add a Connection, I think you get a window that looks like this. Yes? No? So the first thing it's asking is, what type of database connection do you want to make? Well, we want to pick SQL Server, and if we check always use this action, it doesn't give us this prompt again. So next time, it'll automatically assume it's SQL Server. So just check this box that says always. Use this to connect to SQL Server 2005 or above. So that's what we're going to want. And in your assignment, you'll want the same option. We're not going to use any other type of database in this course. So just click OK. And now it gives us the same kind of connection window we had in Management Studio. So to connect, most of you can probably connect this way. Just put in local as the server, Windows Authentication, and then you can type the database name here, Control-Alt-PC. I need to connect with my computer name, because that's just the way my SQL Server is set up. And my SQL Server is set up to use the username and password. I'll say save my password. And notice once it authenticates me, as soon as I start typing, it finds my database. If you are connecting to my database on Loosefoot, you need to enter these credentials. Under the server name, there's your server name. You use SQL Server Authentication with this username and this password. And under select or enter database name, we're connecting to Control-Alt-PC. And I can click test my connection. It says, yes, I can connect. Visual Studio can connect. So whichever way you connected through Management Studio, you want to connect the exact same way here. Test it. Make sure you get a successful test. And then we can click OK. So it adds it over here. So we can actually see the database within Visual Studio as well. We just don't have most of the features of Management Studio. So I'm going to use this because my connection string over here is empty. So how do I use it? If I right-click my server and choose Properties, Visual Studio opens a Properties window here. And in here, one of the properties, and the one I'm interested in, is my connection string. So if I just highlight and copy that, that's the value that needs to go in our ASP.NET code, our JSON code. So I'll just paste that in. Now it wiped out my password, so I need to put my password back in, which is this for me. If you're using Windows Authentication, you don't have a password. You get integrated security equals true instead. That means just use Windows. If you're using this server, make sure you put the password in. So I've replaced that default connection with my own database. And now if I save, my site should reload. I'll show you that process one more time, then we'll take a break. So now my site's working again. So again, to be able to get the connection string, we view the Server Explorer, we add the data connection, and then if we right-click it and choose Properties, we can just go ahead and copy that connection string and paste it into line 3. We can write the code, we can write the connection string, but this is faster and it's going to be more accurate. So we're not doing anything with the database yet, but we are actually connecting to it when our web application runs. We're just not interacting with any part of it yet, but our connection is here. Okay, now one word of warning moving forward for you. If you take my code from GitHub, when I start publishing my code to GitHub from now on, my project is always going to have my connection string in there, right? This is my computer name. So if I put this on GitHub and you download it and try and run it and you don't change it, it will never connect to the database because it's trying to connect to my laptop. This is my machine name. So if you're going to be taking code from GitHub from now on, you're always going to have to keep your own app settings.json so you stay connected to your database because you won't be able to connect to mine. Okay. All right, it's almost 10. I need to step out for a couple minutes. There's probably no point in me putting this code up on GitHub yet, but I will stop the stream. You can review the video if you need to, and then we'll look at how do we actually start building models using controllers once we're connected to our database.